Good morning and welcome to the webinar this morning about the latest trends in giving and 7 practical ideas for things you can do to grow the giving to your charity. My name's Chris Allwood and I lead the team at CAF who create new services for donors and for charities. And over the last couple of years we have launched and continue to develop CAF Donate, which is a really simple way for charities to receive donations. And you'll see that I'll use that in some of the examples that we show as we go through the webinar. My background is in charities and social enterprises, mostly in fundraising and startup. The webinar this morning will be about half an hour long for the actual webinar itself, and then a bit of time for questions at the end, and it's in 2 main parts. So for the first part, we'll look at some of the main trends in fundraising. Who's giving, where are they giving, how are they giving, and then where and how are charities getting their income. And then in the second part, we'll look at more practical ideas for growing fundraising. Now, this is a rerun of the webinar we ran a couple of times last year, but it's got the latest figures in it, and some of the trends have changed slightly, and we've also refined the webinar based on the feedback that people have sent. It is being recorded, and so no need to try and write down stuff that you're seeing on the slides or listening to. We'll send around a recording to everyone who's registered for the webinar at the end. There is a chance to ask questions. Please just type them in as we go. If you look at the GoToWebinar panel, there's a section called questions. Just put them into there, and then at the end we'll answer as many of those as we can. It'd be great if you could just quickly type in that box as a little practice to say whether you can hear me okay and see the screen okay. It gives us a lot of reassurance that there are actually people at the other end receiving this. When the webinar finishes, when you close the window, it'll ask you a couple of feedback questions. It'd be really good if you were able to fill those in, because that really helps us refine the webinars that we do in the future. So I think that's all the housekeeping. Let's get started into the meat of this, and let's start by looking at where charities get their income. So this is their voluntary income. So it's not income from investments or from trading, but this is the income they get from voluntary sources. So let's just zoom in on that. And you can see that the biggest, by quite a long way, is from individuals. The biggest source of income for charities is from individuals. Almost half of their income is coming from individuals. And then there are sort of 3 other categories that are also really significant. So there's government, there's legacies, and there's voluntary sector. And by voluntary sector, that means things like trusts and foundations who are part of the voluntary sector themselves, but they're making grants on to other charities. And they're all each at about 1/6. But this is the overall picture for the whole sector, and it changes quite a bit depending on the size of the charity that we're talking about, that we're looking at. So in order to tailor the webinar a bit to the type of charities of people who are taking part, I'm going to just run a quick poll to find out what size of charity you are from. So hopefully now you should see up on your screen a quick question asking about the size of organization that you are from. If you could just click on the appropriate one, and then I'll share that with everyone in a moment. I can see that people are answering that. That's excellent. Thank you. I think that's pretty much everyone's voted. Excellent. Let's finish that there, and I'll share that with you so you can see the results. And you should be able to see that actually we've got quite nearly almost half of you are from charities with a turnover between 100,000 and £1 million. So a few much smaller charities, and no very large charities, but some large ones. So I'll sort of try and focus in the middle, but I'll cover the other ends as well. Thank you very much for that. So let's start at the smaller end, and these are what we call the micro charities, and these have got a turnover of less than £10,000. And you'll see that for these charities, individuals are all important, making up 85% of the income. And that's sort of 4/5 or even 5/6, but it's quite hard to say 5/6. I think I'll stick to 4/5 of their income. And the other sort of bits that play their part are the government at 3%, legacies at 7%, and the voluntary sector at 4%. So that's those grant-making trusts. I think the interesting thing to note here actually is the legacies. So when we looked at the figures previously, from about 2 years before, legacies didn't really feature for this size of charity. And there is a definite trend that legacies are being left now to all sizes of charities rather than just the large ones, which historically was the case. And so that's a really interesting trend to note, and quite a recent one, quite a recent change. Let's now look at the small charities. These are charities with a turnover of between 10,000 and 100,000, and individuals are still really important to the income of these charities. About 2/3 of the income is coming from those individuals. And then the next biggest is the voluntary sector, is those trusts and foundations. About 1/6 of the income coming from those. And then after that, it's government with 10% coming from government. And that's been a really significant shift, that 2 years previously, 20% of the income of these charities was coming from government. So the government input into this size of charity has halved in just 2 years. So a really significant shift. And I'm sure any of you who work in charities of this kind of size will be all too aware of that change. So the medium-sized one. So this is the category that most of you, or almost half of you, are part of, the turnover of between £100,000 and £1 million. And you can see that individuals still by far the largest category, but slightly less than for the smaller charities, at just under half. Voluntary sector is again the second largest and really quite significant, with 20% of the income coming from trusts and foundations. Government's also significant, 15%, but that's down from 25% 2 years ago. So a big drop in the government income. And the legacy income, the lottery income rather, is significant here at 6%. It's actually, of all the sizes of organisations, the biggest proportion of lottery income comes to these medium-sized charities. And you also note the legacy income there, 7%. So a good amount of income coming from legacies to these medium-sized charities. Now the large ones, and I know that some of you are from these charities, turnover between £1 million and £10 million. And you can see that for these individuals, again, just under half. Voluntary and government are both at 16%, so they're sort of equally important to this group. And the government has decreased, but not as much as for the smaller charities. So the government income over the last 2 years is down by 5%. And the grant-making income is up by 3%. So in some senses, it has replaced some of that lost income from statutory sources. Legacies are now up to 10% for this group, so becoming a really significant proportion of the income. And lottery is slightly down to 3%. 2 years ago, that was actually 5%. So the lottery income is slightly less for these large charities. And then just to quickly cover this, though none of you are actually from this group of charities, the major charities, those with an income of more than £10 million, these are getting a really significant proportion of their income from legacies, so 20%, and that's continuing to increase. So it's not that the legacy income is just moving down to smaller charities, but it's actually increasing all over. Voluntary sector income is slightly up again, as is a sort of broad picture, up to 16%. And the lottery income is actually slightly up for this group as well, up to 3%. It was only 1% 2 years ago. I'm going to do another quick poll now, just to ask you how fast you like your webinars. So am I going at about the right speed? Would you like me to slow down? Would you like me to speed up? Just let me know how this is for you, whether I'm gabbling or whether you'd like me to slow down a bit. Those answers coming in now. Thank you very much for those. Just give you a couple more seconds. Great. As you can see, most of you think I'm going about right, and a few a bit slow. Okay, I will try and speed up a little bit. Thank you very much for that. Now, I'd like to switch slightly now. The data we've looked at so far is based on the annual returns that charities all submit to the Charity Commission. And the detail that we've got is very useful, and it's very helpful because it's the whole market view. It's the whole of the charity sector view, because everyone has to do one. But there's not that much detail in it. And so if you want a bit more detail, there's another place that you can go, which is a group of 23 charities who take part in a scheme called FUNDRAISING. And they choose to share a lot more information with each other about their fundraising. And that helps them with benchmarking, whether they're doing well, how much they should be spending on different types of fundraising. And very helpfully, that group of charities also publish a summary each year of their data. And so we can look at that now, and this is called the Fund Ratios Study. And you can see that over the last, these are the 2013 is the latest figures that they've published, and I've also included 2011 just so you can compare and see how much or little different things are changing. You can see you get quite a bit better breakdown of the different types of fundraising that these 23 charities are doing. And you can see that for these 23 charities, legacies are incredibly important. Now, of course, I'm not saying that this is representative of the whole market. It isn't, as we know, because legacies don't represent this large scale of the market. But what it does show you is how these 23 charities, how their income, the fundraising income they're getting, compares to how much they're spending on generating that income. So you can see about a third of the income is coming from legacies, and about a fifth, about 20%, is coming from committed giving, and these are the people who are regularly supporting the charity, probably through direct debits and maybe some through standing orders. But I think where this gets really interesting is where you compare that income to the spending. So the pie chart at the top is the same as on the previous slide. These are all for 2013. But the pie chart at the bottom and the second column show how much those 23 charities spend on generating that income. So you can see they get 32% of their income from legacies, but they're only spending 5% of their fundraising spend on getting that income. At the other end, with direct mail, so that second from the bottom, the direct marketing, they're getting only 9% of their income is coming from direct marketing, but 28% of their spend, in fact the biggest spend category, is there. And that might seem a bit like, well, why do they spend it if they get so little income off it? But of course, that's where you get your new donors. And those donors, if that direct marketing is successful, will go on to become the regular donors, the committed givers, and keeping a regular donor in touch with your cause is much cheaper than finding a new donor, as I'm sure you're all well aware. And then of those committed givers, again, the warmest of those committed givers, the most committed, if you like, are the most likely to leave you a legacy and to be the people who bring in that large amount of legacy income as well. Let's have a little look at how the spend on the different areas of fundraising is changing. So over the last year, you can see that for those 23 charities, they have increased their spend on committed giving. So that's up almost 17%, and they've decreased their spend on the competitions and the lotteries. Now, when we ran this webinar before, lots of people were really interested in this data, and I am too. I think it's really valuable stuff. If you just Google fund ratios, and then you will quickly get to the bit of the Institute of Fundraising site, which has all the published data from all the different years. So please do go and have a look at that if you would find that useful. I'd now like to look at this from another perspective, from the donor perspective. And the data for this comes from CAF's long-term study around donors and how and where they're giving, which is UK Giving. So let's look now at who is actually doing that giving. So the first chart on the left shows each of the years and what proportion of adults report that they give to charity in a typical month. And you can see that that's remained remarkably stable over the years, of between 50 and 60%, usually only moving a couple of percent in any given year. Now you'll also see that last year it then dropped significantly to 40%. And the honest answer to this question is, the obvious question is, well, why? What's going on? And I'm afraid the answer is we're not quite sure. We're very interested in this change. We are looking into it to try and understand it. What we don't know is it to do with the way we've collected the data? We've changed the number of times we're asking this question. We're now asking it 4 times a year rather than 3 times a year. So it might be something to do with that, or it might just be a blip that to do with the particular time where we asked. Maybe there was something unusual in the data. So we're not quite sure why it is. Historically, it's been very steady, but we are looking very closely to see if this is, in fact, a significant trend or a blip in the data. Second one is looking at gender, and you can see that, broadly speaking, men and women give fairly similar values of donations over the course of a month. Men very slightly more than women, but it's not significant. And then the last one looks at how old people are and how much they give at different ages. And you can see that basically as people get older, they tend to give a bit more. And interestingly, that carries on even after people retire. So you'd think that when they have a bit less money, they might give a bit less. But actually that's not the case. And they do continue giving more as they get older. Now I'd like to look at how they give that money. And this chart shows all the different methods that they use for making that gift. And you'll see that cash is still the most popular way of giving to charity. And that's a really important thing to remember. And it's not the highest value, so this chart doesn't show value, it just shows the actual frequency of the different methods. So definitely don't ignore cash. And you may know that CAF are looking at various cash alternatives for this kind of impulse giving. We're testing some stuff out with contactless at the moment to try and work out, as cash starts to decline in the economy overall, what replacements could we offer to charities to help them continue to get that kind of impulse gift. But then the second one is direct debit, and we've emphasized that just to make that really clear. And I think that's really important because the value of direct debits is much higher than the average value of a cash gift. And of course, it comes every month. and it gives you that foreknowledge and that security of knowing that that direct debit will probably continue to come in. And so direct debits, it's no surprise that charities are so focused on getting direct debits. And that is growing. So that's up from about 26% a few years ago. So that's continuing to grow in importance. But the really strange thing about direct debit is that although donors give a lot of direct debits and they're very important and charities are very focused on getting direct debits, actually quite few charities, quite a small proportion of charities can actually receive them. So this was a study done about 4 years ago now by the Payments Council to look at the different payment types that charities could receive. And you can see that checks is the most common payment that charities receive, then cash, then backs, standing orders, then just checks, so nothing else. And finally, direct debits at sort of that 6th position, I think that is, 6th position. So only 9% of charities can actually receive direct debits. Oh, sorry, I thought I could zoom in then, but I can't. And it was this fact and this sort of mismatch that actually inspired us to create Captain 8. Because when we spoke to charities about why they weren't receiving direct debits, we were told that, well, it's expensive to set up, there are monthly fees that you have to pay, our bank won't allow us to do it, they say we're not a big enough charity to be able to do it. And we thought, well, I wonder if there's a way we can get around this and make this more possible by pooling the direct debits of thousands of charities together on what we call a single service user number. So effectively, we can absorb the costs by CAF, and then we can actually offer direct debits to all charities without any kind of setup or monthly fee. And so that's what we've done with direct debit, with Captain 8 rather. And so lots and lots of charities are now using it to be able to accept direct debits for the first time. Let's switch to another perspective again and look at some of the sort of the key trends in fundraising that might be affecting you. So I'm sure many of you will have guessed that this may come up. I won't go on about mobile. I'm just going to draw your attention to a few key stats. I'm sure you haven't been to any fundraising conference or any kind of webinar without being told lots and lots about how mobile is the future and you need to be ready for it. And of course that's right, but I'm not going to dwell. But I will give you some key stats and hopefully they'll be useful to reinforce your business cases for making changes to this area. And these come from the Ofcom Communications Report. Google that if you want the latest version. I think it comes out every quarter, so there's always really up-to-date data on this kind of stuff freely available. Mobile ownership is now about 93%, which is pretty much universal. It means that only the real diehards who don't want a mobile don't have one. This is in adults, obviously. And pay monthly is now up to 62%, and that's continuing to increase. And that is quite important because these three categories, pay monthly, smartphone ownership, and use of the web on phones, are really closely linked. Because essentially, people tend to surf the web on their phone if it's a smartphone and if they're on pay monthly, so they're getting their data included in their contract. And you can see that use of the web on phones is now 61% of people are using the web on their phones, and that's grown quite a bit, up 17% since the previous year. And then the other big change is tablets. More than half of people have now got a tablet. When we're talking to people now, we're often finding that people will have a PC at home, they'll have a desktop or a laptop, but they have, when it breaks, they won't replace it. So they have no plans of getting another one ever. They'll buy a tablet, or they already have a tablet, or they'll just surf the web on their phones. And so when we're talking about digital, we're really talking about phones and tablets now. The desktop big screen experience is, for a lot of people, something that's going to become historic really quite quickly. next one is another sort of change in perspective, and this is looking at why people actually give donations. What is it about the ask and about the method of the ask which actually inspired them to give? And this is a YouGov report done in the States a couple of years ago, and it's the best data I've seen on actually which fundraising channels are effective for inspiring people to give. So let's zoom in on that. Hopefully you should be able to read that now. And unsurprisingly, in first place is people giving to charities they regularly support. And of course, we all know this, that the regular supporters are the people most likely to give to you. And that bears out in the previous slides, so that's why committed giving is such an important part of charitable fundraising. But interestingly, in number 2 spot is responding to direct mail. So it's still a really important way of fundraising, and we shouldn't neglect it. And despite it being somewhat controversial at the moment, when done well, can be a really good way of new people finding out about your cause. Then the next two I think are particularly interesting. So the next one is I hear about the cause in the media. So that's effectively PR on the part of the charity to get stories in the press. And then the last one is, or the fourth one rather, is I responded to an email campaign. And the reason I sort of draw your attention to those two is that actually those are far more about the quality of the story that you're telling than they are about the size of your marketing budget. And a number of you, the majority of you, are from smaller charities where you won't have large marketing budgets to do fundraising. But actually, if you tell a really good story and get it to the right press, or if you create really good email campaigns and use every effort to collect people's email address who might be interested in your cause, you can do those last two really well. So I think there's some real interesting and exciting options there, actually. Another key trend is campaigns. So I'm sure you've seen Movember and World's Biggest Coffee Morning, but I think it's also bearing in mind that campaigns have been used really successfully by smaller charities as well. And I think that's particularly the case where charities have quite a broad remit, and sometimes it's quite hard to be specific about the impact that somebody's donation might make, because you do quite a lot of different things. And so if you have that problem, that we're quite a sort of multi-dimensional charity, you might think about using a campaign to make a really specific ask to people where they can see a real tangible impact from responding to that ask. And then the last trend that I'm going to mention is the sort of just the diversity of ways, the proliferation of the number of ways that people give to charities. So in the past, charities might have had sort of one or two core ways that people supported them. Maybe you had a government grant, council grant, and maybe you had some kind of child sponsorship or some particular way that your charity was supported. Increasingly, we're finding with the charities we're working with now, they don't have one or two, they don't even have 5 or 6, but typically they have sort of 10 or 12 different ways, different funding streams for people to donate to the charity. And it's a sort of basket of products kind of approach, which in some ways is complicated and expensive, but it also means it spreads the risk. If one or two of those methods don't work so effectively, the whole organization isn't at risk because you've got all the other types that can sort of hold it up. And we're going to walk into the second half of the webinar now, and in that we'll have a look a bit at the different ways you could either create that portfolio or develop the portfolio you've got. And hopefully some of those ideas will be useful to you in that. So let's move into the second half of the webinar, the fundraising ideas. So the first idea, and this is born, as you can imagine, straight out of the data that I've shown you, is if you don't offer it, start offering direct debit. It's pretty straightforward, but the benefits are huge. And I don't just mean online, I mean offline as well. And it's no silver bullet or quick win. It takes a long time and a lot of concentrated effort to build up regular givers to your cause, but it is well worth it. And so I'm skipping ahead, shouldn't we? The big advantage of direct debit is that if it's standing orders, which historically a lot of charities have used, have to be set up by the donor with their bank. And so you rely on the donor getting round to doing that, and some of them won't. The big benefit with direct debit is you as the charity do the legwork. So after the donor has filled in your donation form, so they've put their account details, you're the person who actually sets it up. And that means it's much more in your control, and you're not going to forget to do it. So the second one, I think you may have had a sneak preview of this one, is just optimize online. So it's important. A lot of people are still looking at your websites on their desktops or their laptops, and it's important that that's a good experience. A huge number of charities, I'm afraid, the website experience of making a donation online is fairly poor. And it's easy now to do that. So this is an example from a Captain 8 customer who've done it really well, a charity called Porchlight. And there's just some simple tips that you can get from this. So the first thing is have a donate button on every page of your site. And often charities do that by incorporating it into the navigation at the top. And you can see here it's in a different color just to make it really stand out. The next one is keep the donors inside your site. You don't really want them linking out to another site to take the donation. They might get distracted. They might not come back. Match the colors and the fonts with the rest of your site so that it feels like part of your site. And Porchlight have done that by using the widget. And so the Captain 8 widget, which is the piece on the left, is actually just a little bit of code that we give them, which they embed in their site. And it looks like it's part of their site, but actually it's being hosted securely by CAF. Then show them what their donation buys. So here they've been really clear. In fact, they've done it in two ways as to what £12 means, what a regular donation of £12 means to the charity. What does it buy? And equally down on the right, they've really sort of made that really clear with what £100 or even £500 buys. And then the last point is make sure that the system is configured that they get straight away a receipt and a thank you for that donation. So they don't feel it's just gone off into the ether and they don't know what's happened, but that you've received it and that you're grateful for receiving it. If you like, Captain 8 also offers a full page version of the same thing. So that people can go into after they click donate on your site, they just go into a full page which is branded to look like the rest of your site. Next one is mobile. As I said before, mobile is just becoming the main way that people surf the web, particularly individuals when they're at home, the main way they surf the web. So make sure your donation journey optimizes for use on a mobile device. So this is that same page that we just saw just now, but optimized for a mobile-sized screen, and that just happens automatically if somebody views that page on a mobile device. So now I'm going to backtrack slightly and say, but don't forget the offline world. Of course, the world is going online, but at the moment, the vast majority of donations are still set up offline. So that means people phoning you up or you phoning them up and making a donation, or people filling in pieces of paper on donation forms and giving them or posting them to you. But online services can still accept these donations. So these are the screens that Captain 8 uses to be able to take a donation over the phone by credit card or by direct debit. Equally, if people fill in lots of direct debit forms, you can put them in a spreadsheet and upload them. So you can upload them all at once to make that process much easier and quicker. Next, Facebook. think about how you might use Facebook as part of your engagement. So how are you going to use that to build your relationship with your existing donors and also to find new ones? And there have been lots of interesting stuff which uses Facebook very heavily. I'm sure you haven't missed Triathlon or the Movember. I couldn't think of the word of it for a moment then, but the lovely moustache there for Movember. But also smaller charities are using Facebook really effectively. Here, Merlin, who are, I mean, not a small charity, but not one of the major charities either, ran a thing called the Plumpy Nut Challenge. And they're a disaster relief charity, and they have what they call their Plumpy Nut bars, which have got a lot of peanuts in, which they use in disaster situations when people are malnourished to help build people up and help them survive through that stage after a disaster. And so what they did is they challenged their Facebook followers to live on Plumpy Nut bars for a day and to be sponsored to do that. And then they posted them out the bars, and people posted on the Facebook page how they were doing, what they thought of it, all the rest of it. And it was a really effective campaign. It didn't cost them much to run. They raised more than £40,000, and they got 500 new donors who hadn't supported the charity before. And indeed, they got 5 new celebrity ambassadors who came across the campaign and wanted to get involved. So a really sort of creative way of using Facebook. And make sure if you're doing that kind of thing that people can make their donation inside Facebook as well. So this is the Castanate Facebook app, which actually allows you to create a donate button on your Facebook page, and you go into the donate screens inside Facebook. The next area I'd like to look at is legacies. And I'm sure you've seen earlier from the slides just how effective legacies can be as a way of supporting the charities. It's the biggest source of unrestricted gifts to the charity sector now, and it is predicted to grow significantly. About 1 in 7 people currently leave legacies for charities, but 1 in 3 people say that they would consider it. So there's a lot of scope there for growth. And baby boomers, who have been the most generous generation, are mostly retired now, and it won't be long until, I'm afraid, those people start to die, and they want a chance to continue the good work they've been doing over the course of their life after they die. And so make sure you give them that opportunity to sign up to your cause for your warmest supporters, so that they know how to do that and how to leave a legacy to you. So the return on investment for legacies is very attractive. So the latest research from Fundraisers reckons that for every £1 you invest, you can get £27 back. Now that sounds amazing, doesn't it? It sounds like a pyramid selling scheme. We've even got a pyramid to just show it here. It is not a silver bullet. There's no magic in this. So on average, charities reckon it takes about 7 years to get a return from a legacy campaign. And essentially, it is the result of having done really good fundraising for a significant amount of time, so that people feel inspired and warm enough to your cause to want to leave a legacy to you. It's also really difficult to know if you've been successful, because often people won't tell you that they've left a legacy, and so you don't actually find out until they die. But there are a couple of ways that you could go about it. Indeed, dip your toe in it if you're not sure whether it's for you. So let's start with if you really go for it. So here's a small charity, Freedom from Torture. And what they did with their warmest supporters was they phoned them up and said, we are talking to our closest supporters about leaving a legacy and about how they would do that if they wanted to. And then they followed that up with a letter. And of those warmest supporters, they got a more than 8% pledge rate. That's people saying that they would leave them a legacy, which is a really amazing result when you think about it. and that will be really significant income for that charity in the future. Now, if you think that might be a bit much for us, I'm not quite sure we're ready for that, the simplest thing you can do is just have a good page on your website about legacies and about how you leave a legacy. And there's just some quick tips that you might want to make really obvious on that. I mean, firstly, the first tip is have a look at some other charities who do it well and choose the best bits from them and just explain to people why they might want to leave a legacy and then how they might do it if that's what they want to do. Some other things are make sure that page is really accessible from the home page, less than 3 clicks. Make it a large text option, so don't put it in tiny writing because the older people who it's most relevant for might find that difficult to read. And also offer it as a download, so that if people want to download it and print it off, they can then take it to their will writer or their solicitor, and then it can have all the information with them. And now the last of the ideas is around trusts and foundations. So this is the voluntary income that we saw earlier and is becoming a more and more important source of income for all charities. Now, obviously, this is like many of these ideas, this is a large area of fundraising, so I can only hope to sort of give you a bit of a flavour. But a lot of charities are moving into trust and foundation fundraising at the moment. And really, at its fundamental, it's about finding a good fit between the bit of work that you're trying to do and the funder. And if you can find that good fit, you'll be successful. And if you can't, you won't. There's no point in this type of fundraising writing a single application template and then squirting it out to 1,000 funders. You will have no success at all. It's all about spending lots of time on individual applications and making them fit really well to a funder. So some good places to start to find the right funders are things like the Directory of Grant-Making Trusts, or there are lots of online fundraising databases or trust databases. So that's a good place to start. Some of them are paid, some of them are free. If there are paid-for services, often councils for voluntary service or even some libraries will subscribe to them if you can't afford to do that as an organisation. Another good tip is look at similar charities to you and find out who's funding them. They'll usually have a thank you page to their funders. Have a look on there and see who's funding them, because that shows those funders are interested in working in your area. The process you go through for funding is really important, and this is a process I've borrowed from Bond, who are the umbrella group for development charities, and they've got a really good guide actually to trust and foundation fundraising. And basically it's all about that fit and getting as much contact with the funder as you can in the early stages. So talk to them if you possibly can to find out what they're really interested in. Share your ideas and see if you can effectively develop the application with them rather than having a sort of shot in the dark and hoping that it's going to be the right thing. We've come to the end of the webinar now. Thank you very much for spending the time with me today. Now's a chance to submit any questions you have. I think we've had quite a few already, but there's plenty of time still to type yours in. Just use the question box on the GoToWebinar panel, and you can type them in, and I will have a go at answering them as they come through. So a question here, could the drop in giving be linked to a noticeable increase in negative media coverage? And I mean, there is a chance that that is the case. I think the data is from 2014, so it probably wouldn't be the most recent coverage, but certainly that could have happened. So yeah, we are looking at it at the moment, and as soon as we have a view on that, we'll publish that and let you know. But thank you for that, Lanny. Robert, does direct debit include standing orders? I'm going to make a bit of a guess at your question here, Robert. Let me just flick back to what I think you're talking about. I think you're talking about this screen here, maybe, as to, and there's a separate category for standing orders here. So no, direct debit doesn't include standing orders. And then on, maybe this one is the one you're talking about. And yes, on this screen, direct debit does include standing orders. It means regular gift. So yeah, I think that's probably the one you're talking about. On that one, direct debit does include standing orders. So another one from Lanny here, the US reasons for giving. So let's go to that here. The US reasons for giving are very different to UK reasons though. DM is huge in the US. I'm not sure whether it's any bigger in the US than it is in the UK. It is certainly big in both. Have you got research on UK reasons for giving? I'm afraid we haven't, and that's actually why I've used this US study, because we couldn't find any research done effectively on talking to people straight after they've made a gift as to what it was that prompted them. And we would really like to see that research because I think it'd be really useful to compare the two. Certainly email is bigger in the US than in the UK. I'm not sure, I may be wrong, but I'm not sure whether direct mail is as well. Paul, do you think it's worth contacting trusts and foundations 12 months after you've not heard from them? I think it definitely is, Paul. I mean, to be honest, if you are showing some persistence, that's always a good thing. And the more you can talk to them about what it is they liked or didn't like about your applications, the more you're going to be able to find out about what's going to be a successful application in the future. So yeah, I think it's a really good idea to contact them at a good period after if they've rejected your applications. Really, really good idea. Beatrice, could you talk more about email campaigns for small charities? Well, that's a really interesting one. I mean, to be honest, I think that's probably a webinar worth of work. We are looking at the moment as to what the future webinars should be, so I will definitely add that in as a potential webinar theme. Thank you very much for that, Beatrice. Yeah, I think that would be a really interesting thing for us to do. Julia, can you tell me more about the Captain8 Facebook app? Certainly. So what it is an app for Facebook. So once you've signed up to Captain8, what you need to do is on your organization's Facebook page, you just add the app, and then when you first go into the app, it'll just ask you which charity you are. So you can lock it down to a particular charity or indeed a particular campaign if that's what you want. But if you want more details, in a moment I'll just go to the last page which has got all our contact details, and we'd be more than happy to talk you through how exactly you do that stuff. Amy, do cash gifts literally relate to cash, notes and coins, and how are those gifts collective? Yes, they do, Amy. Literally people putting coins and notes in buckets and collection tins, and so some charities, particularly those who have sort of flag days and that kind of thing, collect very large quantities of cash, and some charities just have a lot of the coin tins and the buckets available, and there's lots of particularly volunteer hours in collecting those gifts. Bob, income versus spending percentage isn't very helpful without knowing the amounts on fundraising ratios. It certainly would be helpful to know the amounts. I think the charities don't choose to share that publicly. I'm sure they do share it with each other, but they unfortunately don't spend that. They don't share that information publicly. If it would be really useful to you, I'm sure you could talk to them about joining the Fund Ratios group. That there would be a cost involved in that, obviously, to pay for the group, but have a look on their reports and see what they share there. But obviously, they only share the highlights publicly. Um, Thank you ever so much. I'm afraid that's all the questions we've got time for. Do feel free to carry on sending them in, and we will come back to you probably through email. But at the moment, that's all we've got time for. Please do contact us if there's anything that you'd like explaining more, or to find out more about Caftonate or anything of the other CAF products that we offer. Thanks again ever so much for being with us today. I hope you have a really interesting and a productive day. Thank you. Thanks a lot.